Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the continuing crisis of a critical shortage of workers thanks to our government's Brexit plans of building a big old fence around Britain and telling people to bugger off. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I'm going to discuss hospitality first because there was a fairly big survey done here and reported on in the news. It's a very hefty sector of our economy as well. And the headline stats here are that there are about 200,000 vacancies in British hospitality. That's around about 10%. So 1 out of every 10 jobs in British hospitality is unfilled. And that a quarter of pubs, restaurants and hotels have been forced to close, at least for part of the week, if not altogether, due to these shortages. Now, an industry that was already hit by the pandemic, and still is, it would still struggle, you would think. Like, for example, personally, I'm not prepared to travel to events in the same way as I did pre-COVID. I don't happen to think that 1,200 people a week dying and silly numbers of people being infected is the right time to go on journeys, with the only aim being recreation. It's different if you don't need to for your work. But the problems that the industry is having now is down to the supply side of things, not demand. Like, demand you would think is going to be low because there'll be more than just me who doesn't fancy going on recreational jaunts around the country. And it's another moment when you realise just how bad Brexit is, when you consider that the hospitality industry, which, like I said, must surely have lower demand than would historically be the case right now. You know, even if you say that lots of the public aren't taking COVID seriously and they are trying to engage with hospitality, there's still some that aren't. So it must be lower than the usual demand, and yet it can't even meet what lower demand there is. A poll of 90 said that 90% of pubs, well no, it's a poll of 90% of pubs, bars and restaurants said that their revenue was down by a fifth due to staff shortages. Not COVID, not being unable to attract enough customers, but not actually having the staff to operate. The article also mentioned a survey that found half of bars and nightclubs are not operating at full capacity because they can't get the security staff. There was an interesting quote from a Scottish pub chain saying a lot of people who got a second job while they were on furlough, like driving for Amazon or working at Tesco, haven't come back because it was more secure. The job they got instead was more secure. It's an interesting juxtaposition of sorts going on here that I've mentioned before. Because on the one hand, you look at this and you go, well, because Brexit means we don't have anywhere near enough workers to fill vacancies. This gives those workers a great deal more choice. The workers who do remain and available to do those jobs, they've got a bit more choice now, a bit more power. It's actually really good for the less paid workers because they get more power over pay and conditions. Your boss wants to treat you like crap because they think they can just get someone in the next day. Well, guess what? They can't. You can just go, you're going to start treating me with a bit of respect, otherwise I'll go somewhere that will. Of course, this is only for workers in areas where there are a lot of vacancies. We have to remember geographically, there are still parts of the country with very few job opportunities. It hasn't helped them. It should also be remembered that because inflation is the highest it's been for a decade, the real terms pay increase that some workers are getting is still negative as the higher costs of food, petrol and energy completely wipes out the gains. But some are at least getting more secure jobs or better jobs, which is something. But on the other hand, because there are so many vacancies that aren't being filled, there are businesses that just cannot take place. You know, consider what that means. It first of all means that the people who would have done those jobs are not paying taxes to our Treasury. That's the first impact. So we lose a load of public money. So the workers would have been paying income tax, national insurance. The businesses, the extra business they would have been doing compared to now, would have been paying more in business rates. The Treasury would have got more money. And when it comes to prioritising, we know that this government prioritised giving money to the rich and denying the poor. So although some lower paid workers in some parts of the country may be getting better work, perhaps even with better pay, their local services are still going to be cut because the Treasury is missing a huge number of tax receipts. The second problem is that when businesses scale back their service or close altogether, the workers they did have either lose hours or lose their jobs altogether. Either way, they're losing pay. Like, think about that nightclub that can't open on, say, a Thursday night because it can't get security staff. Well, the bar staff and cleaners have also lost out on some work as well, haven't they? The article also continued the now ubiquitous fear that the government are belatedly playing catch-up over worries that were expressed months ago. And I still keep musing on this. None of the existential problems faced by so many of our businesses came as a surprise. I knew about them. The government certainly knew about them. I know that the government were told about them a long time ago, yet they did nothing. And I don't mean didn't do enough. I mean literally did nothing. Boris Johnson would say that Brexit had unshackled British businesses and it was up to them to take advantage. In other words, any business that fails, it's because we didn't take advantage. In actual fact, all it actually did was deprive them of a huge labour market, because the difficulties in getting workers from overseas now are immense and in many cases unsurmountable. They also point out that what the government have done, far too late in the day, the fact that the government have acted at all means that they know they should have done. It's both not enough and it's short term. Again, another feature of this government. I'm not actually sure that this is a specific feature of Boris Johnson or whether it's Brexit in general. Be interesting to find out. If Boris Johnson goes, which unfortunately won't be anytime soon, but if he does go, will his successor, who will still have to be a committed Brexiteer, at least face up to the problems and work on solutions? Only time will tell on that one. And it was also interesting to note that the ending of furlough didn't help the sector at all. The way Tory MPs talked, you'd think that people were sat at home with their feet up, loving the furlough life, and would then have to return to work once the scheme ended. That's what they kept saying. Oh, ending his furlough, all these lazy beggars at home, we need to force them to go back into work. The reality, as always, was very different to the Tory delusion. Vacancies continued to rise in hospitality. The people on furlough were, as the scheme was designed for, just those who could not carry out their work. So at the end of the furlough, all that brought was higher unemployment in areas where there were few vacancies, not more workers in areas with high demand. Of course, it's not just hospitality that's struggling. In fact, I don't know of a sector that isn't struggling. Even well-paid jobs are short of staff. We had a recent reminder in the news that we are desperately short of vets. Brexit has hit us both ends here. Because of Brexit trade barriers, we need more vets than before Brexit to manage things like health certification. However, also because of Brexit, we have access to fewer vets than we had before Brexit. So we have higher demand and lower supply. Now, frankly, I don't care what Conservatives come up with about being the party of business. A government that makes this basic miscalculation does not understand the first thing about either business or the economy. But there was also an article in the Brexit supporting Telegraph, which reported George Eustace, saying that working mothers could now work in abattoirs. Another government suggestion for how other people can solve the government's Brexit problems because they don't want to put any work in themselves. The issue, according to the Minister for Farming, is that thanks to the ready supply of workers that being in a huge pan-European single market allowed, abattoirs were hiring people for full-time shifts at their facilities. But now that the government was helpfully depriving our food supply chain of workers and creating shortages in our shops, this is apparently a great opportunity for working mothers. Because abattoirs are so desperate for staff, they will have to be more receptive to flexible working hours. And yes, natural consequence of not being able to get what was obviously the preferred full shift workers. Sure. So good old George says mothers can now drop their kids off at school, club some cows over the head for a few hours, then be back at school in time for chucking out time to pick up their offspring. Not that I'm sure about his use of the term working mothers there. These mothers are working. Doesn't that imply they've got employment already? Needless to say, this concept has not been researched by the minister. Flexible working is absolutely essential for parents of young children. This is why the government should be expanding legislation on it, not trying to suggest that market forces will naturally create it. It won't. People shouldn't be frozen out of work because shift patterns don't fit around childcare, and the cost of alternative childcare would wipe out the wages earned. But that's for the government to deal with. But the Association of Independent Meat Suppliers said that although changing shift patterns is helpful for some workers, this is not going to solve the problem of their labour shortage. Like I keep having to say, you can understand general members of the public looking at vacancy figures, then looking at unemployment figures and thinking, well, there are people without jobs, so we have the people to fill those vacancies. But a minister is supposed to understand, because there'll be people telling them, that a pocket of unemployment in Oldham does not help a shortage of workers in Dudley. And it's not even like these sectors have the huge vacancies going unfilled that are reported right now. They believe it'll get worse. I mean, from a seasonal point of view, it will definitely get worse over the next month as demand for their services always rises in the run up to Christmas. This is why we're having to fly turkeys in from Poland, for example. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.